Hi, welcome to Sacred Intelligence TV. I am your co-host, Susan Bainbridge. We have decided to do a little something different today with our show. You're used to seeing Dr. Terrlyn Avery as your host, and she normally will be the one introducing the show. Today, though, our very special guest is none other than our host, Dr. Terrlyn Avery. Today, we're going to be talking with her a little bit about her journey to the place that she is at now, where she is a psychologist as well as a pastor and now a published author as well. We'll talk a little bit about her new book and some of the things that she discovered in writing it. And we'll just start off, I guess, by asking if you could tell us a little bit about that journey, Terrlyn. Owning this private practice, you're a business owner, you're a clinical psychologist, you've got your master's in divinity, so you've been a pastor, and now an author. Tell us a little bit about how all of this has come into your life.
So it's been a long journey, and I wanted to say, in terms of just thinking about the book actually started to germinate about 7 years ago. So it just goes to show how long this process really takes. And for me, it started with me thinking about, I want to write a book of meditations. And I actually solicited a number of pastors to write some meditations to go in this meditation book. But as God would have it, it just, that wasn't the plan. I went to divinity school and really thought I could write a book while I was a student. I was a student with 2 young children, and I think that I worked part-time in the beginning. Well, actually, I know that I worked part-time, and it just didn't happen. So it really has evolved over time. But if we think about my journey towards where I am now, that has really been a long journey. And if I had to say so, you've heard me say on other shows that I had a degree in psychology, thought that I was serving God in that way, in which I was serving God and doing the work that I was doing, working with adolescents at the time, just really pouring myself into my work. But I kept hearing the sacred say, there's more for you to do. And there's something that I want you to do, which is, I want you to become a minister. And it took me years before I accepted that calling. and
How did it first come to you? How do you hear that calling?
So I think that this is really important, because it's important for us as we teach people about tapping into the sacred's voice. It's important for us to get into a place of where we can listen and to be able to discern the difference between when it's our voice versus when it's the sacred's voice, or even an outsider's voice. All of us have little voices that speak to us, and sometimes they're critical, and sometimes they're, sometimes they're positive voices that are speaking, saying, "Oh, go do this," but really about tapping into what are you feeling led to do. So, a part of my discernment process was I had these opportunities where people out of nowhere would say to me, "Have you ever thought about becoming a minister?" And I thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And the very first time it happened to me, I actually was doing, I won't say a sermon because I wasn't an ordained minister, but I was delivering a message at a church. And I invited some people that I knew to go with me. And this was while I was doing my PhD. And one of the people, when I was done, said, "I don't know what you think you're doing getting a PhD, because God is calling you to do something else." And I literally got sick to my stomach, because the thought of going to school again really sickened me. I cannot tell you.
It's a little terrifying, isn't it? Yes.
It was a lot terrifying, and I thought, I'm done with school. And as a matter of fact, I think I was at the point of ABD, all but dissertation, and I thought, there's no way I am going back to school again. No way.
Yeah, isn't a PhD supposed to be what they call a terminal degree? That's the end point, like you're done, you write that dissertation and you move forward.
I sort of thought that
Yeah, not
that's
so
what it
much.
meant. And so it was really interesting that this person said that to me. And I will tell you, that was probably 1997, 1998, and I did not go to divinity school to 2004. So that really shows you that it was a long time before I really
Accepted
just
it.
said, okay, this is really what you're telling me to do. But then I would have other opportunities where out of the blue, I would say something to someone, or I would do another workshop with a group of women, and I might do it around a scriptural theme, but I'm a therapist, it's a workshop. I'm just using the scriptures to kind of help dig at some stuff that we all face and go through. And I remember this woman, she's now deceased, she came up to me and just beautiful smile on her face, and she said, have you ever thought about becoming a minister? And I said, no. Other people have thought about it, but I've not thought about it for me. So I didn't want to think any more about it. But the Spirit just kept talking and talking and talking. And pretty soon, after so many times of people coming out of the blue saying it to you, and that's one of the ways that we talk about discerning what your calling is and what the Spirit is guiding you to do. It's like confirmation for you. And so I got to a point where I said, okay, God, maybe you are calling me to be a minister. And if you're calling me to be a minister, I'm going to do that one day. One day when I'm about 50 years of age or so, I'm going to do it. You know, I'm going to go ahead and do the things that I'm doing now. I'm going to work with these adolescents that I'm working with. You know, so okay. So ironically, after I came to that resignation that, yes, God, you are calling me to do this one day, but the one day was still down the line, I went to a women's retreat. And I was presenting at this women's retreat, but there was also a woman there who spoke. And, well, actually, let me be clear. She was a pastor, so I don't want to belittle as a woman what she said. She was a pastor, and she did this sermon called, Can You Hear Me Now? And each time she spoke, saying, Can you hear me now? It was as if the sacred was in my face, saying, Terrlyn, can you hear me now? This is what I want you to do. So much so that she said in her sermon, she said, I was going to be a child clinical psychologist. And she said, and I said, okay, God, when I'm about 50, I'll become a minister. So that's two things that I just said to myself. And then she said a whole bunch of other stuff. I can't even remember what she said, but each time she said it, she's like, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? And I was like, yes, I can hear you now.
Read you loud and clear.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, Susan, what was really interesting for me is that I had full intentions of talking to this woman anyway, because I just wanted to find out some of her views about some stuff that was going on in the church. And after she was done, I those things were just kind of secondary. And I went to her and I said, I really need to talk with you when you get a chance, but I'm going to go to a workshop and I'll talk to you later. And she said, no, come now. And I said, no, I can wait. And she said, no, come now. I don't know what she saw in my face, maybe terror.
Maybe,
honestly,
very possible.
But I went to her, and by the time I reached her, I was sobbing. And for people who know me, that they're probably laughing at that because they don't see me do that type of. But I literally was sobbing, and I said to her, I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know. And she said very gently, you
Yes,
know.
you do.
You
Yes,
know. And
you
I said,
do.
no, I don't know. But again, the sacred had been speaking to me all of that time. And so after I sobbed a while and I told her, you know, what was going on, and she said, I'm not surprised. And then I told two other ministers, one of whom I didn't even realize knew me that well, but their exact words were, I'm not surprised. And so when the sacred speaks to us, the sacred will guide us in the way that we need to go, but often that there are other people, and that's where those shared relationships come in. There are other people who are also affirming and confirming. And sometimes they are being used and don't even realize that the sacred is using them for the purpose. So that's a long way of getting to, that's how I came to this place of divinity and psychology together and merging those two things. And what was really interesting, I still remember saying to her that day, I'm already serving. I am already serving God. And so I don't understand why I need to become a minister. And she said, well, the question is not so much that you aren't serving, but perhaps what can you do as an ordained minister
that you can't do as a clinical psychologist?
Yes.
And did you answer that question sufficiently for yourself?
I actually think it's becoming more and more apparent every day, and that's really how the sacred works. Sometimes the sacred just says, this is your calling, and you have to go out there and do it. And I don't really have to explain everything to you right now, but you will understand in the future. And I really think that what makes me capable of doing the work that I do, and particularly for sacred intelligence, is merging that spirituality and the psychology. And I could have done it before because I've always been steeped from a very early age in a belief in the sacred and understanding from my perspective in terms of scripture, understanding how that works. And I could always work with someone dealing with those issues, but there's a very different, and if I may use this word, authority that comes with having study the word and people seeing you as a pastor and as a psychologist as well, because they know that, okay, I'm coming from a different sort of understanding, and I can share what some of your views are, or maybe I can help you tease out some of those views that you've held for a very long time, because now I come with it from a different place.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are plenty of therapists that do pastoral counseling, that do some degree of working with spirituality with the folks they work with, and I agree that there's something different about actually being a pastor and being able to speak directly from the scripture and to say, okay, but it also says this when someone is working through some difficult things.
Yeah, I just want to say, Susan, and we've kind of done this a bit when we've done our retreats as well. One of the things, and I know that you'll talk a little bit about it later in terms of the book, but one of the things that I've done in the book is I've taken scriptures, for instance, and I've used those scriptures to talk about psychological stuff that we go through. And I think that's one of the ways that the two things merge. So to talk about, well, let's look at this story that happened and what was going on even for these people in the Bible. That's the same stuff that we're going through. So now let's tease out, how is that working in your life, these particular issues that we're dealing with? So if it's fear, how is that showing up? Because if you read, and I will use this, I'm going to use the Bible as an example because that's what I know, but really if you look at the stories in the Bible, especially if you look in the Old Testament, I mean, those people had some stuff going on. And there's nothing new under the sun. And I have another female clergy woman who says, she says, these people are living biblical lives because there's so much drama in the Old Testament. And actually there's some in the New Testament too. But really, so when you take that and say, so what do we learn from this? And so that's a little bit about what I do in the book, is to say, well, how can we learn from this? So the book is not to proselytize anyone to any particular faith tradition, because really they're sacred texts that are important.
And that is certainly one of the things that I wanted to ask about in terms of the fact that you are very inclusive in the book, and you've chosen in both your practice and in writing this book to continue to use the term the sacred or sacred source. When for you, that is very clearly God. But you have made it sort of more accessible to others who maybe capital G God is not their sacred source, or not what they consider to be their sacred source. So how did you grapple with whether or not you were going to really go there, because you're inclusive, and yet you do use scriptures as to illustrate points throughout the book?
So I have to tell you, that's a part of us then looking at the selfish piece, So in our practice, we talk about sacred, selfish, and shared. And with us, the selfish piece is really about knowing who you are, who you have been created to be. And for me, I was born into a Christian family. I believe wholeheartedly in the Christian tradition. I respect other people's tradition. And I believe that the God I serve is powerful enough to make a way for other folks other than Christians. And so I don't hold that belief necessarily that, this is the only way that we can reach the sacred, because God is bigger than that. And so I have to tell you, when I began writing, and you probably will remember some of the discussions that we had, as an aside, I want to say this to folks who are thinking about writing and thinking about charging forth with whatever it is that your purpose is and your passion is. When you think about something, about putting it down on paper, writing things, you already have it internally inside of you, because it's been steeped in you since before birth. That thing that you need to move forward in your purpose is already there. So with the writing, it was already there. And this is what's important for people who might be interested in writing. You've probably already written it. So whether it's been in your journals or somewhere else, it's been written. So for me, if we go backwards to me saying the meditations were going to take a lot of work to pull these pieces together. And besides, I didn't have 365 meditations that were offered to me. But it was about, what do you know? This is what you know. This authentically, you know how to be a psychologist, and you're a pastor, and you've written sermons. So the sermons were already there on my computer. And the way I typically do my sermons is I try to have a psychological piece in there. It may not feel like it necessarily. I mean, I'm not beating you over the head with stuff, although I did have a friend say to me one time, I feel like I've been to therapy and the church at the same time, because I was able to talk about really, the ABCs that we use in cognitive behavioral therapy, our antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. So I use that in a psychological way with scripture. And so for me, to answer your question, I know it's kind of long-winded here, but I struggled with, I want the book to reach not just folks who identify as Christian, but I want folks to understand that we all are created in divineness and in goodness and love and light. So at first I thought about, well, let me take a quote from the scripture, let me take a quote from the Dalai Lama, let me take a quote from maybe Native American spirituality. And then I finally said, that's not who you are. You might be able to appreciate it, but you can't write from that perspective. So stay with yourself. Stay with honoring who you are. And that's how I finally just said, scripture is what I know. I've written about it already. And so I say in the beginning of the book that I'm using the scripture because it's what I know and it's what speaks to me, but it's not to proselytize you, but you can learn from it. So I hope that other people will, in fact, look at the book. In fact, one of my reviewers is a Jewish woman who actually said, you allow your faith to come through without pushing it on other folks. So that's how I came to the decision to.
All right. And I would say I agree with that's definitely a good way of describing the balance that you were able to achieve in the book. So how was writing the book a calling for you? Did you get hit over the head quite as much with that one?
Well, I got hit over the head with people who knew me, which is really interesting because there were people who knew me who kept saying, you need to write a book. And I kept thinking, well, why don't you write a book? Because they were talking about writing a book too. Mm-hmm. But somehow they just kept saying, you really need to write a book. Mm-hmm. So, and then I have a business coach, Leslie Ingves, who also said to me, it's already on your computer, Terrlyn. She said, I'm sure you have something that's there. Now, she was saying this years later, and it had already germinated in 2007. And maybe I was talking to her about it at some point. I thought about it, and so she just said, "Well, it's already there. Just start writing." And from start to finish, it's been a long process. Now, some people, I heard someone say last night at an event that I was at, that it took her 2 months to write a book. I don't know how it took her 2 months to do it. God bless her. For me, the process has been much longer, though, because I want to say in 2012 was probably when I really started seriously thinking about putting the book together and putting the pieces together. And I thought about doing self-publishing, and that would have been fine. But what I really wanted to make sure that I put out a book that I felt like was high quality. And for me, I wanted to make sure I could have editors who could look at the book and say, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, and someone other than family and friends looking, because I know lots of people who are great writers. In fact, you were an English major in school, so clearly you could have gone through and you could have looked at it, but I just needed an objective eye to look at the book and say, does this make sense? Am I understanding? A person from the outside who could understand what sacred intelligence meant.
Yeah.
A person who could understand what sacred, selfish, and shared relationships meant. So I decided to do a publisher, and she's between a traditional publisher and a self-publishing. So I had the editors and all of that. So it really I would still say it took me a good 2 years to get it done, because the editing process of going back and forth and changing this and changing that and perseverating over words that you
and
use,
fonts
and exactly. Yeah.
How you're gonna, what font looks best?
That's exactly
What do you
right.
want the cover photo to look like?
Yes, yes.
There are lots of
yes.
decisions to make, certainly,
Yeah.
with publishing a book. Can you say, and I don't know how you'll be able to answer this, but do you feel that you have a target audience in mind with this book? Who do you most want to reach with your message?
Well, my target audience really would be women who are from about 35 to really 60, 65, because I wish that younger women would really learn how to tap into their sacred intelligence, because that's what it's about. But on some level, I feel like developmentally, some younger people may not be there yet to say, I'm ready to really think about looking seriously at this issue and looking at the spiritual piece with it. Because I think about, even though I've always grown up in the church and with God being a central source of my life, I can remember even being in my late 20s, early 30s and hearing the minister preach and thinking, wow, I've heard sermons like this before, but I wasn't getting it because I was at a different place in life. And so I think you have to have been through some things and some experiences in life. And so I think that women are the target audience. Now, that's not to say that men can't pick the book up and read the book. As a matter of fact, I was just talking to my husband about it because he's really very proud of me for doing it. And I said, but hon, you have to read the book because I want you to give me the male perspective of it as well. The reason why I say women, though, I want to be clear, is because of my work that I've done with women. And you and I both have done a lot of work with women. And so we see that if women are not healed and working through their issues, we've seen the devastating results of their kids. Now, that is not to say that if men don't heal,
Absolutely.
it's the same thing. But I think as women, with us having this nurturing quality about us, I feel like we need to just do some work with women around those issues. So they are the target audience, but I would love for men and even younger women to read the book as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Would you mind if I ask you to share a little story from your book? I would love to hear you talk a little bit about the story of Mrs. Emma, if you wouldn't mind sharing that.
Yeah. So the story of Emma, and this is where pastors get their inspiration from for their sermons, because all throughout the week, so you have text that you're looking at, and you're thinking about the text, and you're drawing from examples of everyday life to say, how can I make this relevant to the congregation that I'm speaking before? And I was actually going to be visiting a congregation and speaking. And sometimes, quite frankly, you don't have a text in mind. And you're saying, okay, God, when are you going to give me this text?
Bring it to me, yes.
But this was a particular day that I was going to the hair salon, and it was really, really hot. It was one of those hot New England days. And when I got outside to the car, I said, good God, what am I doing out here? I must be crazy going to get my hair done on a day like today. But anyway, I moved forward. And when I got there, it was just myself and the hairstylist at first. But later on, Miss Emma comes in. And Miss Emma comes in with her husband. And Miss Emma has Alzheimer's. And I had seen them there before. And, you know, Frank always brings her in. And Frank helps her to sit down in the chair. And he said to her, you know, Emma, I'm going to leave you and I'll be back shortly to get you. And sometimes Frank would stay and kind of chit-chat with us, the other ladies in there, and other times he would leave her. So this particular day he left her, and she sat there in her own world, you know, just kind of rocking and humming. And when it was time for her to get her hair done, after I was done, I was preparing to leave, and Pam walks over to her, and she says to her, she grabs her hands, because, if I may, because, you know, when you have Alzheimer's, your gait is a little off. And so she said, Miss Emma, she said, it's time for me to do your hair. Come with me. So she helps her to get up out of her seat, and she brings her over very slowly to the chair. And she says, Miss Emma, I want you to sit down. And Miss Emma got really agitated, and she says, no, I'm gonna fall, I'm gonna fall. And so Pam said, no, Miss Emma, you're not gonna fall, I have you. And she says, no, I'm gonna fall, what are you doing? And so she moves away from the chair. And Pam, just ever so gently, said to her, Miss Emma, sing me a song. And she said, I don't know any songs, I don't remember any songs. Now, mind you, when she was in the chair rocking, she was humming Rock of Ages, Clef for Me. So Pam begins to sing this song, His Eye is on the Sparrow, and those of you out there who know that song will know the lyrics. And it was like, why should I feel discouraged? You know, why should the shadows come? And as she began to sing it, Miss Emma began to sing with her. And I'll tell you, these tears just welled up in my eyes, because what I realized in that moment, and it makes me really think about it now, is that when you have the sacred down in here, the sacred never ever leaves you. You may forget the day to day, but you don't forget the sacred's presence. And so I thought, and that was what my sermon was, and that's the beginning of my book. One of the stories in my book is because I talked about this scripture, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that's really the premise even of the book, is about loving God, yourself, and your neighbor. That's what those relationships are about. And when Miss Emma began to sing that song, Pam guided her over to the chair. She sat down, and she got her hair done. No more problems. And I thought, what love is that? You know, Pam had to have this shared relationship and understand that we are all in this together, right?
Yeah.
And even I thought about Frank and his shared relationship with Emma, and how Frank obviously cared about himself because he was impeccably dressed, and they must be in their 80s. She was well-groomed, well-cared for. And so I thought about, here's her love for God, and even though she might forget the day-to-day, she knew that God could really bring her through this journey. And I wondered, what had she seen in her life? You know?
Yeah.
And then I just thought about that selfish piece for her and Pam and for Frank, for me, as I was crying. And I said to Pam, I was like, you're going to make me cry. She was like, get out of here. You're going to make me cry. So, and because it really is just a very moving.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
Very powerful story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that all of that will stay with all of us as we grow older, and as you said, sometimes forget some of the day to day. But it's interesting that music is one way that she was able to tap into that source, saying, I don't remember any songs, but here,
Right.
okay, yes, yes.
But that shows how the sacred works, though, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Sacred speaks to us in many different ways.
Yep.
You know, sacred will speak to you differently than speaking to me. And sometimes it's just like when you go to church, you hear a sermon, and for some people they'll say, what was that pastor talking about? And other people will say, wow, that really hit.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering also if you could tell us a little bit. There was in, I believe, chapter 2, a little section where you speak about the concept, and I hopefully will be able to pronounce this correctly, Ubuntu, and that loosely translated is I am because we are. Tell me a little bit about...
I am because we are, and we are because I am. And that really speaks to, if you kind of think about Pam and Miss Emma, it really does speak to how we are all interrelated. And I couldn't be the person I am without having other folks in my life who have helped me to become the person that I am. And I know that if I help you, ultimately, you're helping me in some way too. I mean, even when we think about this book, I could not, how many times even before I got it to an editor, someone read the book for me, you know? And so our jobs, our responsibility, because if I think about from a scriptural place, it says to whom much is given, much is required. I am required. It is not just my right to do whatever I want to do. I am put here for a purpose. I am put here to help other people. It isn't just about me, me, me. Now, do I want to enjoy things? Of course I do. Do I get tired sometimes and say, no, look, I've been giving a lot here. I'm ready to get a little bit back. Yes, of course. That's the human part of us to do that, because we do live in this world. And really, from even a biblical place, we also deserve to be paid for our work and the work that we do. So, but if we think about this idea of helping others, it is so important for us to give back to our communities. It's important for us, I think, as women to help each other along the way. You know, don't just do something because you're trying to make it, but we have a responsibility to help other folks. If I see your child in trouble, and this probably really bugs my daughter, because when I see her friends doing something that I think they shouldn't be doing, like in the winter walking out with shorts on from track practice or soccer practice, I yell at all of them for doing it. And she's like, Mom, don't do that because you're embarrassing me, or they're embarrassed. And I said, I'm being a mother, because if that child gets sick, I know what it's like for her mother to have to deal with that. So it's just about being responsible for one another.
Yeah. In the section of your book about selfish intimacy, of course, the sacred, the selfish, and the shared, your first words of advice include the message that we need to say no more often sometimes, that's a very, very important word. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that. I think that's
so let me ask you
a big
something.
point.
How good are you at saying no?
I am awful at it, which is one reason why I'm asking you this question. Personally, yes, I do have trouble saying no, absolutely, yeah.
And I often put people on the spot. I had someone else to ask me that question too, and I said to her, how often do you say no? And I thought, well, now what if she says, I say no all the time? But the truth of the matter is, I have learned to say no over the years, and there are probably a few other things I need to learn to say no about. But we always want to do things to help other people out, particularly as women, because no offense to any of my male viewers, but I find that men don't have a problem with saying no. Nope, I don't have time to do that. So if it's a matter of, can you run the kids over to do such and such? Nope, because I have to go over here and do blah, blah, blah. Whereas as a mom, I might have to go over here and do blah, 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 but I still need to run the kids to go do it.
Right.
So sometimes too, you know, and even my kids will say things like, Mom, can you come here for a minute? Really? I've worked all day, and what have you done? You know, and you want me to come to you, and sometimes I do it, but what my little one told me the other day, she says, yeah, but I have a job too, it's going to school. I said, yeah, I have a job that's a lot of work, and when I come home, it's still other work. And so even with the kids, just saying no about the little things sometimes is important, because as parents, we often want to please our kids. We want to please our bosses. We want to please the people who we feel like are an authority over us, want to please our clients, people we're in a relationship with. And the problem is, if you don't learn how to say no, you end up doing a job that's not quite the standard that you want to deliver, because you're too overwhelmed, you're too stressed out. It's going to hit you somewhere. So it's either going to hit you in that at work, you're doing this fantastic job and you're taking on all these responsibilities, but when you come home, you're giving your family hell about something else. It's going to come out one way or the other if you spread yourself too thin. So I have learned over time, even when opportunities look like they're great opportunities, let's say you have an opportunity to speak somewhere, and of course you want to go and you want to speak, but then you think about, okay, what's the cost to me doing that? What's the cost of me availing myself? What's the cost emotionally? What's the cost spiritually? What's the cost financially? You want to think about all of those things, because we bring all of that into every situation that we're dealing with. So you have to learn how to say no, and that's what I hope people will learn how to do. And saying no on multiple levels too. No, it's not acceptable for you to treat me that way. So there are various ways that we say no.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, yeah, no is an important word. Yeah. Do you ever find that you're saying no when maybe you should be saying yes? Or, well, I mean, you've already given us an example of that, I guess. Constantly saying, no, I'm not going to be a minister. No, other people have said that. No, not me. No, thank you.
Well, so it's funny though, Susan, that you say that, because we have to be ready for what God is calling us to do. And sometimes we have to be pushed into that readiness. But I am completely a different person now than I would have been if I had started saying yes and just went directly to divinity school. I knew so much more when I went to divinity school than I did prior to that. I also, just from a psychological place and a spiritual place, was in a very different place because God had been working in my life. And going to divinity school was not easy. And even getting to this point of opening my practice and writing a book, I've had lots of challenges that people know nothing about. And being able to stay the course and to stay faithful to what I know God is calling me to do, because I will give you just an example. The saying yes to God requires you to have this unshakable faith. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be times that you say, God, now come on, what are you doing? Because I'm real plain with God. But I have to know and believe that God has called me to this work. That is what keeps me going day to day. When I first began divinity school, I went part-time. I started at Hartford Seminary so that I could keep my full-time job. So I had a full-time job, a part-time job in a private practice. I had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. My first semester of seminary, my husband broke his legs in October. I started in September.
That's convenient timing.
That was convenient timing. And so how do you manage a husband with broken legs who had to go to rehab to learn to re-walk again, out of work for 10 months because he's walking with braces on his legs, and just maneuvering and managing that? Thank God my father came up for a couple of weeks. My niece came up for a month, and that was really, really great. It was really good during the first part of my husband's recovery, but at the same time, it was still a long haul to do all of that, and to do your homework and you know, who wants to write papers and to do all of that? I love school.
And do your dusting and vacuuming.
Well, I couldn't do all that,
cooking.
so
Yeah,
I won't.
Exactly.
I won't.
Yeah.
And thankfully, my husband, who's the cook, once he was able to walk, he got back to cooking, which was really good. But
So did you just eat takeout for 10 months? Because I know you don't.
No, I didn't. Let me tell you, my husband broke his legs in October, and this is an aside, but he cooked Thanksgiving dinner. Now, I did volunteer.
Wow.
But that shows you
why
how
he
much.
didn't take you up on
Oh,
that.
stop it. But anyway, so but the point is, it's been a long journey. It's really been a long journey because financially there have been costs to us for doing this. Because the first thing I said to him was that, honey, I'm going to have to stop my private practice, which was part-time. And then when I transferred to Yale, well, Yale said you have to come to school during the middle of the day, and I couldn't work as a school psychologist and go to school in the middle of the day. So then I had to go to him and say, honey, I have to kind of leave my full-time job as well. And thankfully I got another part-time job that paid me well, but still it's been a significant cost to us. So I really forget what your question was, but because I guess I do have the
saying
gift
yes
to give
instead of no.
But
Are
so when we say yes, though, Susan, that was a big yes.
Yeah, you have to be ready.
You have to be ready for
right.
what's coming and saying, I am going to do this no matter what. And that's not an easy thing to say yes to. I know women I work with all the time who want to start over in their lives, but they say, well, I can't. Even when we try to get them to retreats, I can't because I got to do X, Y, and Z. You should be saying yes to that, but you also have to be ready. Mm-hmm. You know, just like our clients have to be ready to do the work when they come in. Yeah. You know, and so I don't know if there have been opportunities that I've missed that I should have said yes to and didn't. I don't feel like I have any regrets towards that. Mm-hmm. You know, do I look back sometime and say, well, could I have done divinity school differently? Could I have maybe not gone to Yale? But if I didn't go to Yale, I wouldn't have been an ordained Presbyterian pastor because Harvard Seminary didn't offer an MDiv, and that's what the Presbyterian denomination demanded. But although my husband asked me a very poignant question when I started, he said, did God tell you to become a minister or a Presbyterian minister? And I was like, oh.
Yes,
but it was what
God
I knew.
did not specify.
No, God didn't specify. But that's where the who you are comes in, being authentic to who you are. And I mean, fourth generation Presbyterian. Could I break out of it? Sure I could, but it's who I am. And so I did what I knew to do and followed that leading, because God doesn't micromanage your life and tell you every single thing to do. God just said, listen, this is what you're going to do. You're going. Mm-hmm. And so are there some things that maybe I could have done differently? Yes, but I'm also faithful that even though I've had the trials, I know that greater is coming, and that's hard for people to see and to believe, but you have to be able to walk in that every day. You have to be able to remind yourself. You have to go to the sacred and read whatever sacred text you have to remind you of that. Mm-hmm. You have to just know it within your being, and you have to also align yourself with people who think in the same way that you think, who can say, yes, we're going to work towards this, and yes, I believe in you. And I have people now who don't even know me quite as well who will still say to me, yes, I believe you're going to be doing X, Y, and Z. And so I see it for you. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
So one of the things, and this is changing the subject a little bit, but one of the things that I really love about this book is that it's more than just, I mean, you, I think, are being modest, perhaps, and speaking about, well, you know, I had all this stuff already on my computer, and I just kind of pulled it together. No, there was a ton of work that went into this, not just pulling sermons that were already written, but completely rewriting them.
Yes.
Rewriting them to the task for, you know, the way that you have the book organized. But what I love about this book, especially in terms of what it offers, is some of the exercises that come with some of the chapters. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about some of those exercises, how you feel they can help someone to begin making these more healthy choices, tapping into that sacred intelligence. Where did these exercises come from? What and why? Why did you feel it was important for those to be there?
Because you know what, I have to tell you, I have this one client, we were talking recently about how many self-help books that she's read. So I said to her, don't read any more self-help books. You already know what to do. You know what you need to do. You just need to do it. And so then she said, well, can I read your book? And I said, well, of course, you can read my book. But you're working with me. You're getting me, right? So we don't do the work that we need to do on ourselves to change our lives. Many times we don't. And we can pick up a book and read it, and you can pick up my book and read it and say, oh, this is great. I should do this. When I get a chance, I'll go back and do the exercises. No, if you read the book, do the exercises when you read the book. The reason why I want you to do the exercises is because you have to start thinking about what areas of my life do I need to change. So I think that one of the chapters I talk about cleaning our houses, right? And I give you exercises to say, you know, what are some of the areas of your life that you need to start taking a look at and removing some of the clutter out of your life? And the reason why, or how I came up with them, the fact of doing these exercises is because, you know, from the retreats, we've been doing retreats together for quite a while. And years ago, I did a retreat on sacred, selfish, and shared intimacies, and I developed a workbook from that. And from that workbook, questions were developed, and you and I actually developed some of those questions together. You were also helpful with looking through the book and when it was in process and saying, okay, what are some good questions would be here. So again, it's not done in a vacuum. It's done by, you know, talking with other therapists too that I've talked to, namely you and my niece who's also a psychologist. I would run things by her and say, what do you think about these questions? But not necessarily other therapists, because I feel like we've done the work for so long, we know the questions.
Yeah.
But many of these things were a combination of the sermons and the retreats that we had done. And when we do retreats, folks come to our retreats and they think they're going to work out some little issues while they're there, but they don't realize that they're coming to do some deep work. That's what we're about, getting you to do the deep work. So
Absolutely.
if we are talking to you about fear, if we're talking to you about shame and anxiety, we give you exercises during our retreats to make you work on those things, and then to say, what is it that I have to let go of? So that's what the book is about. That's how the psychology and the spirituality is merged. It's not just taking the sermon, as you said, and I appreciate you wording it that way. It's not just taking that sermon and putting it in the book.
No.
It was actually the rewriting of the sermon,
Right.
saying, how do I now make this even more psychological for people to do the work? So it's not a book that you pick up and read it. You can read it, it's very short. You can read it in a day, but if you're going to do the work, I really want people to stop and do the clinical work that they need to do. In fact, I will be starting a group where we're going to go through it. At least we're going to propose going through it. I'm going to give them the option. Would you like to go through this book, and let's do the work.
Yeah.
That's there, because we do, you know, that we also have people who come in who want to do the spiritual piece too. And so this is a way of, okay, we all got psychological issues that we need to deal with. Let's deal with the psychological issues, but let's incorporate the sacred too.
In a framework of that knowing. And it reminds me when we talk about some of our retreats and some of the exercises that we've done, it reminds me of an exercise that we have done where one is to go on a sort of imaginary journey, and that the first time around they go through this guided imagery exercise, walking through some woods by themselves, and then we ask them to look at that again and say, okay, how would you have approached these things differently had you been very consciously aware of there being some sacred divine being with you, whoever or whatever you envision that to be for yourself, and to see that people have a different reaction to things like obstacles in their way, that suddenly new problem-solving ideas come to them, and I love that your point in processing that is often, okay, but why was that sacred not there the first time you walked through?
Yeah, and that's the thing that's amazing to me. Even with people who are very spirit-filled people that I know, they talk about God all the time and they do all this. It's like, well, do you think that the psychological piece, that now you separate it? When you start thinking about your problems, do you separate the sacred from there? And to me, there's no place that God is not. You know, God is everywhere that I am. So that all those things that we go through, because even when we're processing it, and you usually will guide us through it, and then we process it together. But I always close my eyes when you're doing it, and I just love it because I picture myself as we're going through each of those obstacles. And there's never been a time that I stayed stuck at one place and said, oh, I can't confront this bear. I mean, like, it's because the first part is really about meeting a bear. And I remember the very first time we did it, I just remember that bear just enclosing me and making me feel so safe and secure. Now, that would not be the case if it was a real bear.
No, that's guided imagery.
That's guided imagery. Let's just say that.
Just imagery.
But the point was, I felt completely secure because my sacred being was with me. Now, I know there's some smart person out there saying, yeah, but your sacred being is with you if it's a real bear. Listen. We could talk about that in another episode. But
Yes.
in the imagery, I felt it was symbolism for the problems that we face. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're one of the few that does have, who I've done this exercise with over the years, who has had that experience of that immediate, the first time through, having that sense of security and yeah, everything's going to be fine, and I'm going to be able to face these obstacles because I'm not doing it alone.
Yeah. You know what's interesting though, Susan, I have to say, because when we talk about this journey of sacred, selfish, and shared, it has not always been the case when we've done retreats. I know that when you first started working with me, I didn't do sacred, selfish, and shared. Mm-hmm. I really just worked with people with the psychological stuff that was going on. And over time, it has evolved to that because I know that it's so important, and I know that you value that as well. And we've seen a difference in terms of when we incorporate it. Now, we make it such that when we tell stories, for instance, when I use sacred to start my meditations, I can tell a biblical story, but I don't use Jesus or I don't use God when I do it. But the story, for anybody who's a Christian and know the story, they'll know the story that I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. But the reason why I don't use it, not because I'm ashamed of who I am, but I use it because you have to be able to engage multiple people. There are people, and particularly in one of the groups that we did, there was a woman who was an atheist in the groups, or at least she thought. She still thinks that she's an atheist, but we worked through some stuff that day. And because we were able to talk about the sacred being who walked on water. And she talked about what that did to her in terms of her imagery and being able to imagine that because she didn't really believe in this sacred being. But what evolved from that was the opportunity then to talk about how the sacred manifests in our lives. And she opened herself up in a different way that day. And she talked about some reasons why she didn't believe in the sacred, and even did a little psychology 101 to say, do you think it's because? Mm-hmm. And she started to reevaluate it. Now, I'm not certain that she's there yet, and that's her choice. Mm-hmm. But even if you are a person who does not believe in the sacred, you have an opportunity to come and take part in our workshops and our retreats and be able to learn from it and to learn what internal stuff you need to work out to get through your day-to-day.
And I think one thing that's important to note in terms of talking about reaching various audiences and people from different faith backgrounds or from no faith background or what have you. It could be that they started out in a faith tradition and were hurt by that faith tradition, and we've talked about that in the past as well. But I think being able to be that inclusive is important, especially in a day when not everybody is in tune with spirituality, or they think either they have certain preconceived notions about organized religion, and then they have these other kinds of preconceived notions about anyone who uses the word spirituality, because that's too new agey or whatever, and we have these ideas. But whatever it is, whether you consider it something divine or sacred, whether you use those words, I think that whether we acknowledge it or not, there's something that moves in our lives.
And so, Susan, I want to say something to this piece about spirituality, and I know that our time is running short here, but there are those people who will say I'm spiritual and not religious, and I'm not advocating being religious, but what I am advocating, even at a little deeper level than spiritual, you've got to have a foundation inside of you that's going to carry you when the times are good and when the times are bad. And when you're just spiritual, when you're kind of just blowing in the wind with whatever spirituality and you're not committed to any particular practice, you will not be sustained when you're going through something. But if you are spiritual and you have a practice that you do daily that keeps you grounded and that keeps you centered, that's what's going to help you when you are going through the challenges. And I want to be very clear about that. There's a really big distinction between being steeped in something, which is steeped in your faith most often, versus I'm going to just grab onto whatever spiritual thing that's out here. You better know when you're battling cancer, you better know where your faith is coming from. When you're battling divorce or alcoholism, or your child, having problems, when you're battling your own insecurities about things, you better know who you are and where you get that strength from. So I don't want to preach, because I could go there and preach, but as I said, we are running out of time. Yes. And I'm going to just offer that the golden rules would be on our website, as always, because we've kind of run out of time to talk about those, but it's very important for us to really go to the website. I want you to take a look at the show that we've presented today to you on YouTube as well, because of course you can see it on Metrocast, but also just go to the website and take a look again and take a look at the golden rules that are there. We've enjoyed having you on our show today. We flipped the script a little bit today. Susan has a copy of the book, though, she would like to show to you all. It is in print, actually. It's being printed right now.
Yes.
So if
Very
you
beautiful.
are interested in a copy of it, you can go to our website. But what I also want you to know is we are very interested in everybody having an opportunity to do the work that needs to be done. So we are raising funds so that we can donate copies to Safe Futures, which is a domestic violence organization here in Connecticut, and then also we are going to York Prison System, and we're going to donate some as well to the women there, and to a couple other agencies and prison systems in New York as well, because we want everybody to have the opportunity to get to the word. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.